Record. Okay, then hello again for another Ask the Expert session with from ZK with me, your host Robert, ZK support engineer and consulting engineer since around 8 years now. And today we talk about implementing a responsive design. I'm not planning to explain in detail what responsive design is or how to clarify all the terminology about what kind of designs there are, because design is design. I'm not a designer. I'm talking more about the implementation features that we have in ZK and maybe problems that may occur, and show the available APIs that we have to hopefully integrate all the design elements we need. Or if I miss something, I'm hoping to get some feedback or ideas about what might be missing in ZK, so we can allow better integration with more flexible designs. I know there's not a lot, so I hope this hour will be enough today to introduce all the features and just implement a small responsive design. Of course, I prepared the meeting, so I'm not doing the full live coding, but I hope I have a few steps, as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to showing different levels of evolution of a design, and also showing different choices we can make when implementing any kind of responsive design. So maybe just quickly start about what I mean with the responsive design. I'll open my other browser. Where is it? Here. Okay, so of course I only have a very simple layout. This is my first step. I need to start my server. So yeah, maybe as always I have a small example project. In this case, this time I use Gradle. It should be running from command line with a single command. I'll make sure it does before I provide the download. For me, it works right now just using Jetty Runner. I think nothing new. Those of you who joined other meetings know that I'm always switching a bit back and forward between things. Today I use the latest ZK version 9.513, the latest Jetty version. Not the very latest, the version 10 and 11. I think they still had issues with the Jetty runner, so I'm using the latest version 9.4. But it shouldn't matter. It should also work on any other servlet container that is running a ZK application. So application is running, and we just flip. Okay, check the page. Okay, the page loaded again. What we have is 3 or 4 sections. We have a header, we have a footer, we have some kind of navigation area and a content area. And just to show what the design is supposed to do, because I'm not a good designer, I just made an ugly design. So you will be forced to ask your designer or do the design choices yourself. Still, when choosing what should be responsive in an application in a page, you can hopefully implement it after this session, or at least know where to look or what to ask for. So in this case, I have a very simple design. You see these 4 areas, and when we size down, you see the area is shrinking along with the browser after a certain size. There's a maximum size, so I don't go larger. I could have chosen something different to always occupy the full size, but here I chose to have a maximum width of, I think, 1024 pixels. And when we go below 800 pixels, it switches to a more common tablet view. The header has this extra icon that appears to show the navigation. Currently, it doesn't do it because it's hidden by default, and we haven't done anything yet to make our design or to respond to this change. And if we shrink further down, just open the developer tools so we can do this easily. If we shrink further down, we can also see that, for example, there is some fluid parts where just text is automatically line breaking, reducing the size of the content area where needed. This is a design choice. We could also make the content area always be determined by the content. I chose to have always occupy the whole screen and shrink the content area if there's not enough space. Okay, so what did I do here? How to say, when you get a responsive design, someone tells you which screen areas are where, in which mode, small mode, medium mode, large mode. There are lots of different choices you can take. There are different CSS frameworks you can use to implement different screen areas and define where they are. In this case, I used plain CSS and just defined a simple grid layout, because grid is very short to write and good for this example. It will be more complicated if you can't use grid, because you maybe need to support older browsers. But here I chose grid. So the basic layout is like this. Now we have a few divs, a wrapper, we have a header, we have a navigation area, a content area, a footer area, and we have our styles, which just specify our wrapping area. It doesn't have any background colors. It has a background color white, has a max width and a max width of 100%. So it's never getting larger than the current area. So it's shrinking down when necessary. It has a preferred width of 1024 pixels, but as said, if the screen or because of the max width, if the screen area is smaller, it will shrink down. So this is a very easy kind of design. If you have a maximum width, but you want to support smaller sizes, combine the width, like the preferred width, with the maximum width, and then the whole screen area will shrink if there's not enough space anymore. And then all the content inside it can follow this, add scroll bars if needed, or just occupy the whole area. A minimum height, I just said, make it as large as the full screen. It could become larger, but in this example, I make sure it doesn't get larger by choosing how to render the contents. Then we have some background colors for all the other areas, nothing special, some text align, and a few responsive styles. For example, I say if the screen is larger than 800 pixels, in your case, it could be something else, or it can be multiple of these responsive breakpoints. I just say I want to have a grid with 2 columns, the left column for the sidebar and the center taking the rest. And I have 3 rows, which is the header, the center area, in the navigation area, and the footer. Some box shadow, just some fancy effect, completely unnecessary here, but it makes it easier to see where the screen ends and the background starts. And then I just define my different grid areas. For the header, it's the first. It's like, I never understand fully why they chose these weird indexes, but 1/3 means use the first 2 columns. That's their way of counting. I don't agree with this, but they chose it to make it more intuitive. To me, it's less intuitive, but that's what they did. And the navigation, for example, only uses 1 column. The content uses the second column on the right, and the footer picks the first and the second column, which means everything from 1 below 3. And then I have something else we will see later. And for the small case, I have a grid with only 1 column. And the same again, use automatic header width, automatic footer height, and footer height. So they will always squeeze the remaining height of the screen, the center row. So we always have a dynamic center of or a dynamic content area. And what I also do is the navigation area is positioned absolute, so it's outside of the grid, so it doesn't take part of the grid. And it's initially hidden. It has some kind of Z index, so that's why we don't see it. It's just not there, and it's moved away from the screen. Now it says it's left minus 100 view width. The VW is a unit for the percentage of the view width. So it's just completely outside. Yeah, and how do we make this work? So we see in the pure CSS. So we already have a few things that are managed by CSS, which we don't need to care about at all, neither in JavaScript code nor in ZK code. So that's always the easiest thing. If you have some kind of rigid, or not rigid, some kind of responsive base layout for your page, ideally you don't need any code or any JavaScript code or Java code to implement it. Sometimes we need. That's what we look at the next point. In the next example, sometimes we need some JavaScript to add the dynamic parts of it, like enabling or disabling the navigation area. So if we go to the second example, it's almost the same thing as the previous one. I'm just showing a few JavaScript inside the code. So if you have something simple that is only part on a specific, or in your base layout, you can use these kind of inline scripts, which is not server side. It's not this kind of bean shell code. This one is real JavaScript. You can see here it's using the client namespace. We use W for widget because our client side representation of server side components we call widgets, and it's historically sometimes you see a C for client, sometimes W. I prefer W just to correspond to the Java API where it's called widget listener and widget overrides. And what I do here is I implement a few widget listeners that do something. Just show what it does. Going to the JavaScript part or JavaScript example. So now we have our large design where everything is visible. And if we shrink this down, we have our button. We can click it, and this time the navigation is animating in and animating out. I said it's not beautiful, just illustrating that there is something appearing and disappearing. So it's only about the areas, not yet about ZK components. And this is something we implemented with a default jQuery quick listener. So in this case, I tried not to use ZK APIs just to show you how this is possible with plain JavaScript. Still, I use a ZK client-side event listener so that this JavaScript code doesn't fire at the wrong time. I sometimes see the unfortunate case where our users are trying to implement JavaScript in a static script element on the page without any of ZK's lifecycle listeners. And then the JavaScript is executing at the wrong time, too early, too late. You see some flickering. And that's why ZK has client-side event listeners like this W on bind will fire exactly when this element is available. So that's when you can add a click listener to the same element. We have some jQuery customization. So instead, this object here is referring to the widget, and we can directly say use jQuery or create a jQuery object for the current widget. And then it works like normal jQuery. And we say on click, when this thing is clicked, find the navigation area, which is this one here. It has the S-class navigation, and toggle a class navigation show on or off. These double underscores is just some kind of pattern I'm trying to follow here is the BEM or BEM. It's like something called like block element modifier. And because this one is it doesn't have a sub element, it's just a block, the block which is a navigation block, and the modifier is show, or could call it visible or shown. And this is just a sub style. In the styles we can see where is it? I think it's this. Have you seen it? Where's my style? Somehow I'm blind today. Okay, I search for it. Show. Here. Okay. Yeah, see, it's almost doing nothing. It only says when this style is added, it will make it visible and it will change the left property to 0. Previously, it was completely off screen, minus 100. And in this case, I made it simple to myself. I shifted it to the left. In this case, it doesn't trigger a scroll bar. If you shift it to the right, you may have to add some additional styles to avoid the horizontal scroll bar. That's why I move it to the left. Depends on your design and what you need. And what it will do, it will change the left property. And you see here, according to the animation or transition delay, it will take 0.3 seconds to move in and move out. So there's a tiny, lazy animation, which makes it a bit more fancy. Yeah. Don't blame me if no one likes this animation. There can be more complicated ones. You can also use a JavaScript framework to animate this. Here I picked the easiest way. I just toggle a class, which will either add this style class or remove it, and then the animation will automatically be done by CSS. Yeah, the simplest thing I could think of. Important here is you can use JavaScript, so you don't need too much ZK for these kind of effects. And often when you get a design from a designer, they already have some kind of effects built in, and you maybe just reuse these effects. The only thing you need to know is you need the, or you can use ZK's client-side event listeners. In a similar way, I have this kind of dynamic content here. So could be that you have to decorate the content based on something. So whenever the screen is resizing, I want to trigger another JavaScript of my choice. Here I'm logging something to the console, and I change the content to the current event data. In event data is the screen positions. So if whenever I change the screen size, you can see the width is changing here, or if I change the browser height, the height is changing. And that's basically what you need to integrate almost any JavaScript framework for these global changes. Yeah, these on after size will also fire if someone changes orientation on a mobile device. So if we switch to mobile mode here, where is the divider? Okay, we just pick a nice tablet size here, and if I switch to the responsive size, we see the width is 400 pixels and 479 pixels, and now the width is 706 pixels. So it also reacts to these orientation changes. So whenever the screen size orientation changes, you can use the also client side on after size event. You can use these at server side, but this is more expensive. It has a delay in the client side. That's the perfect time to adjust something in your UI if you have to. Just checking the chat if there are any questions so far. No, it's only Gene. Okay. Cool. So this is the simple part. So if you can get past your responsive design without or with only CSS and pure JavaScript, you don't need any ZK features. This is maybe the first step to implement the overall page design. And because the CSS may change a lot, provide different screen sizes, positions, depending on whatever minimum, maximum size your screen currently has. This is ideal if this can be handled directly in the browser and doesn't need to go to the server to decide something. But very often you have to make server-side decisions, and that's what we'll see in the later examples. So this basically covers the first part, the native features. So what do we have for ZK? ZK has several built-in mechanisms to determine. I would say responsiveness is mostly about determining the size of elements and the positions. So you can already use some features. I would not always use all of the features, but sometimes you need them. For example, hflex, vflex is something I would use as little as possible, because this one is depending on your settings, it's setting specific widths to components which may override your responsive styles. And then suddenly you have something in a locked size and your responsive style sheet says something else than the hflex vflex determined. So this could be not ideal. Otherwise, it can also help in cases when you need to determine from server side that this component should have the remaining width of a page or of the page, or the remaining height. So you can specify this in a Zool file and use hflex vflex. But often enough, you can also just use CSS and the CSS flexing. And in the recent ZK version, hflex vflex in ZK is implemented by default using CSS. Sometimes this is still not hard. I would say it's not 95% perfect. So there are lots. There are not lots. I would say there are quite some scenarios where it doesn't fully do what you expect. Then you can always switch back to the old version where Flex is really using the hard-coded widths and heights. But then we need something else to do. So hflex vflex can help, but it's not always perfect. But if you don't know the screen size, it helps you to determine the remaining part of a screen, for example, or the remaining height of a div. So can be used for responsive layouts. There are some widgets that have built-in behavior regarding responsive design. In ZK, some components change their appearance, they change their control scheme. Some of them are, one of these features are sometimes only available in the enterprise edition. So we just have a quick look of a few examples of these. So if we switch back to desktop mode. So this is my page number 3. So this time I filled the page with lots of controls. Of course, your UIs are much more complicated, but I needed something that is not too large. So our navigation area now has a nav bar, which makes sense. So we can open, close this nav bar. It will display the nav items on the left area. When we shrink the screen, it will be hidden, and instead it will be in our animated dynamic nav panel. So already without any changes, we have the same layout or the same component used. We only needed to, let's see, where's the example number 3? This is a bit larger. So we have our navbar. I said just say width 100%. So use the space available. That's what it says. And if it's the full screen for the mobile version, it will grow to everything. Otherwise, it will be limited to the left area of the screen. But the easiest thing is if you can say just fit into the available space. I'm a big fan of percentages when they are working, when they do what we want, because then you don't need to worry about it. It will just automatically fit, and you only care about the container size. And in this case, it's really nicely working. We also, when I'm resizing the browser, it just fits into the current area. Okay. Also, what you notice is when we that this hamburger menu button also disappears in the large version. So it's only visible in the small version. Just a tiny detail we had in the styles. In the content, we have the same thing. We have a V layout. So I'm deliberately saying arrange things vertically. And then we have some content area that may be dynamic or that may have arbitrary content. And we have a menu bar and a toolbar. There's this feature overflow pop-up or overflow pop-up true, which will do something useful. Now you see this toolbar here has 5 items, and if the screen is getting too small, let's close this one, it will overflow the non-fitting items into this pop-up menu. I'm not fully sure why our menu bar doesn't have this feature. Right now we don't have it, but the menu bar responds in a different way. It line breaks. Yeah, it still makes everything available. And we can also see the content area is line breaking some buttons, but still our grid has the scroll bar and adjusts its size accordingly. So everything is using the full height of the screen as we wanted in our design. And so it's shrinking and growing whenever needed. So you have this tab box. Right. Tab box has similar feature when we shrink tab boxes. We have these scroll arrows here, so we can go left and right in the tab box. Then when we switch to then we have a second view, which is our form, some kind of default form. Also here, I added some responsive styles to either have this arranged horizontally if there's enough space, or have the labels above the content if there's the smaller screen version active. And here we see that our pop-ups are working in desktop mode right now. And if we switch to mobile, make a bit more space, if we switch to the form view, you see, for example, this spinner has now two bigger buttons, so it's easier to reach with your fingers, which is one of these automatic behavior changes. The date box will have this kind of Apple style calendar picker, and the same thing about the combo box. There is this kind of pop-up from the bottom. So these are some ZK default or ZK EE built in I think we call it tablet styles or tablet UI. If you don't want this, they can be disabled. Sometimes you want to do all these styles by yourself. And this is a flag in ZK XML, tablet UI disabled. You can set this to true. Oops. And then the tablet UI will look the same as the desktop UI, and you can add your own JavaScript to handle these components differently if you want to. It is sometimes a surprise when you switch to tablet mode that suddenly some components do something else. So if you refresh the screen now, they look exactly the same as in the desktop mode. Now we have this calendar pop-up. It's at a different position because it doesn't fit right now. Let's see if we can make it fit, assuming we have a bigger screen. And now it fits again. Same with this pop-up. Right, it's the normal desktop UI. And also these two buttons are now smaller and vertically arranged. If we shrink down, we have the same behavior for the pop-up menu. Somehow these DevTools responsive preview doesn't send all the same events as a real browser resize. But when doing the orientation change, which is something that happens on a real tablet device, now you usually don't resize your the tablet device yourself. So if you use the orientation change, these events are emulated correctly. So always need to test on a real device, and then these pop-ups appear here as well. And the menu will line break. Okay, how can we get back? So tablet UI disabled. Oops, true, false. Just go back to false. In the meantime, I'm restarting here. I'm always pressing Shift F9 to restart. In case you're wondering how the server restarts, that's just me using the shortcuts. Okay, go back to desktop mode. And when you switch between desktop and mobile mode, you always need to refresh the screen. Otherwise, the server didn't receive the same user agent string, and you might still see the desktop view in the mobile mode or vice versa. So always refresh when you flip this icon. Again, something that doesn't happen in real life because no one can. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it happens. Usually, a mobile device does not transform into a desktop device. But maybe if you attach a screen to a surface Surface tablet or something with a keyboard. And I'm not fully sure if this is the case. If it is, maybe worth considering. Did I have something else on this view? Yes. There's one thing I also find easy to do if you have modal windows. Modal windows are these kind of pop-ups that appear in front of everything. They're, I would say they're never ideal for a mobile device, but if you have to use modal windows, make sure they fit into the screen. And then the same things apply. The contents of the mobile of the modal dialog should be responding, should be responsive, and the modal dialog itself just needs a few simple styles to always fit onto the screen. Now, if you have a fixed width of 700 pixels, it will not fit onto a smaller device. So there are simple styles we can use to make them fit, to make it fit. So if we open this modal, here you see this is my responsive modal window. If I resize the browser now, I gave it a fixed size of 600 pixels, but also one of these maximum width, so it will shrink down if the screen is smaller. And then that's my response. If I say responsive design, my response is if the content doesn't fit, add a scroll bar if you can't avoid. Of course, I would always like to avoid scroll bars. So my alternative here is if we want to avoid the scroll bar, now we go to our modal window. Here's, oh no, I even said the modal window is currently sized by the content. Right now, the content causes it to be 500 pixels width. But if I hadn't done this, I just say content is a normal div. And we reload this page and open the modal. We can see it's just shrinking down to something, just line breaking the text naturally. So this is a very nice modal window that just does something for free. The other alternative I had here was to give this to give the content a max width. It starts at 500 pixels, so that the text is never larger than 500 pixels. So it will always have this line break here. So it doesn't make the dialog bigger. But if it gets smaller, the content never gets larger than 100% of the window area of the modal content area. So it will start line breaking when it gets smaller. And there are other options just to show a few small things that are just for free. If possible, we use the features that come for free in the browser, and it's really a tiny change. It could also be a CSS class. You append to a dialog and say default size, minimum size. You can have different ways here. You can have scroll bars, you can avoid scroll bars, but make sure though the modal window always fits into the screen, which I do here with this style. And the modal window says here, my responsive modal window has, the only thing it has is a max width of 95%. So it's never getting larger than the full screen. I could have put it to 100%, then I don't have a few margins. Can use other CSS, could use calc. I'll say 100 view width, for example, minus 20 pixels. And then we say we take 100% and we leave 10 pixels left and right of the modal window. But also it never grows larger than necessary, but if it's shrinking down, it didn't pick up my style change. Wait. Is this now 10 pixels left and right? Yeah, now we have the left and right stable at 10 pixels. And otherwise it gets larger easily. What did we have here before? 100%. Well, there are many options. I'll leave this one out. Again, not a ZK feature. Besides the ability to to apply custom styles and style rules to a ZK element where needed. And we said responsive modal is our style class, and we use this in our view here. We just say S class responsive modal. I use a content style overflow auto to create a scroll bar if needed. But if I can avoid it by using something else, it will not add the scroll bar. The other one is just to make sure that I can open close the dialog in this example, because it's created statically and I don't want to destroy it. So this is not necessary for any of these. Okay. There was something else. Yeah, because these other buttons don't do anything, right? Yeah, there was nothing else here. And the rest are also just dummies. There's no special functionality behind these. So let's move on to the next, or just checking if there are any questions. No questions. Cool. Yeah, so we have seen some built-in features, how to customize part of the behavior. Oh no, not yet. There was one scenario where I had to customize something, which I don't fully understand why it's there, but somehow the navbar vertical by default has a max width of 36%. Don't ask me. I think it's maybe a bug or some kind of feature I can't explain right now. That's why I overrode this style to 100%. I assume if you are creating a largely different layout, you maybe already have a custom theme project, and then you can override existing component styles or widget styles. Okay. So what else can we, what ZK features, or what other ZK features do we have? Now we have our fourth example, where we have several ways to listen to specific events at client side that are related to responsive design. Now, if we, for example, need to resize something on demand, if something doesn't automatically fit, because ZK is not aware of all the size changes you may do in your application, or some changes are not resizing containers on purpose to avoid these from slowing down the performance. So you can do this on demand once and not for every item you add. So there are some cases, for example, if we resize a button, can we see this? Let's trick it. So what you see is the scroll bar, for example, is cut off here. So we've seen that this div is resizing, but the content below is didn't resize. So the grid is now partially obstructed. Even though we have a scroll bar, the scroll bar will just disappear if I scroll down. So the div still has the same size as before. And only if we resize the screen, it will adjust this. So this is one of these cases where ZK does not track every size change of a component, even though we could just set the width. In this case, it could be some kind of hovering style. Ask your designer what they need. If you come across these kind of things where elements suddenly resize because of some kind of client-side event, then we need to notify ZK that something had changed. So if, for example, we click again, we see the grid again didn't resize properly. And that's where we can fix this by calling fire-sized. Now this is still a client-side feature, because this is the most instant thing we get. So we don't need to wait for the server-side round trip to send this event back. So the fourth example. Just start with this thing, and then we go through these other lifecycle listeners. What do I have? I have this button here. This is the first button. What it will do is it will just change the style of the current button and set some kind of random height. That's what we've seen. It's changing the height of the button. And when we want to call fire-sized, there's a client-side util prefix with ZUTL, fire-sized. We just we tell ZK that the parent has to resize. So we tell the parents to do. And I say parent because this div is completely, I would say, inactive. It doesn't have any sizing rules. It's just always sized by content. So I go to the previous one that has a vflex to it, and this one will trigger a resize of the v layout and all the contents. So it will also re-trigger this vflex calculation here. Excuse me. So one small API function, the UTL fire size. So whenever there is a client-side effect that ZK is not aware of, or ZK deliberately ignores, or maybe there's a bug, this can be a workaround or a solution to tell ZK to resize something, but it needs to be some kind of active component that has a sizing rule. Otherwise, no, this one doesn't do anything. For example, if I only say this.parent and we reload this one, then both of these buttons will cut off the scroll bar if they resize. Yeah, we have to trigger a resize manually, or we could call it from the console. So parent.parent. So this sometimes where you have to maybe figure out which of these, which is the right parent to call the resize to. But often it's not very far. Because I want to resize the grid, I call the common parent of both this div and the grid, which is the V layout. And then it can resize the contents. Okay, so what other client-side features do we have? So what we've seen previously, I just want to go into a bit more detail, was we have this bind. We had the after size and the on bind function. And just to give you an idea in which order they call, the on after size fires usually before the on bind. And also the on bind fires only once when the component is added. After size fires multiple times after the browser resize. So we can check this in the console. Console, just clear. And if we load the page, we see after size. I added this to multiple components. We see the content, the menu bar, the tab box, tab panel, v layout, grid. So after size is calling first for the parents, and then it goes down into the children, and the on bind fires afterwards. I think in reverse order. I didn't put this to every component here, but on bind fires from inside out, and on after size fires from outside in. So you have, depending on what is determining the size of what, if you need to size the parent, maybe based on some content JavaScript, or if you have to size the client, the content based on some parent size, you have two different orders, two different, how to say, events here. If you need something to initialize earlier, you can override the bind method or the client-side bind function, which will, of course, trigger before these components. These ones are event listeners. They start with on, so you just write plain JavaScript. And this one is a widget override. It's just for any arbitrary attribute. Doesn't even need to be an existing function, which can be overridden. And then it will, it's like, we use this for monkey patching. Also, if there is a client-side library problem, we can override methods and provide workarounds. And what I do here is I console log something, and I also call the original method so that the bind still works. When you use this client-side override, the original function is prefixed with $, and this is standard JavaScript to apply a method with the current this object and all the arguments. So you don't have to know all the argument list here. You don't need to know them. There's already this special variable in JavaScript that contains all the arguments of the original function. And here, because I don't need any of the arguments, I just don't care about it. I just pass it on to the original and implement my side effect here. And we could also implement the side effect after calling the original method. So it depends on whether you want to do something before or after DOM elements are created. Okay, and then we also had Wait, did I? No, here we have this watch. Sometimes there are resize events that only depend on adding or removing components. Yeah, when the browser does not resize. Where's my example for this? This is for server side. So I forgot to clean up my examples. It's still here, but we will see this in the next example when we have. Oh, where's my server side listener? Is this here? I think I need to restore this. Okay, I just need to add this because I had these buttons and I somehow removed the example earlier today. Okay, we just add another button here. Button, add a label is like add child. And then we just say on click. This time I say on click without the W. So this one is a server side listener, as if this was done in your server side controller code. And I just say self.getParent. Oh, I need single quotes here because I want to add something with a string. Self.getParent.append child. New button. I just add a few more buttons. New button. And what I'm doing is I just add more buttons to this div. So at some point, the div will overflow to the next line and increase the height of the div. And then we also see that the container doesn't resize. So if we reload this page, we add children, add, and we see it's making the how to say, it's making the area smaller, and we see again ZK doesn't know that this one is affected by it, so we need to call the fire sized event. So we need, I just put this into multiple lines, we see a bit more. Append child semicolon, and then we say now it's a server-side function. We say clients dot resize, and we say self dot get parent. No, the same we saw before. Get parent. And if we reload this, I hope I didn't break anything. Yeah. So now we see that whenever there's a new button, that the grid is responding with our expected result. It's shrinking its size, its visible area. And we also see some event listeners firing. You see the watch on the V layout and on the grid. This is a special kind of, how to say special? No, it's a different kind of listener in ZK. They act more globally, and they're not about a browser size browser resizing. So it's not these on after size, but it's in general, if something was firing the resize, how to react to these kind of events. Otherwise, the on after size it doesn't help us. If we had to execute some kind of extra JavaScript when the grid resizes. It could be that we want to limit the number of columns if the grid gets too small, or we want to, could be any other component that needs to be adjusted by JavaScript for this specific design. And for this, we have these watch listeners. What I did here is I added these watch listeners to the V layout and to the grid, just as an example. I thought, yeah, here. And this is a function that implements the more ugly part here. Because the watch listeners are slightly annoying to implement. The syntax is historically weird. So that's why I like to move this into a special method. And also you need to unlisten these watches so you don't get memory leaks. So here I say, if there's one of these on-size watch events, this is not a normal event. You can't listen to it with on-size directly. That's why we need this watch. So we say for on-size, on this widget, call this method. And then we see this console log. Now we add the listener, and whenever we unbind the widget, we unlisten. So we clean up the memory leak. Now these are the two ways we need. So just to keep in mind, if you have a specific case where the on size doesn't fire because you call fire size directly, these watches can help. If it's too complicated, maybe ask us in our support team. We can often help with these things. It's not easy to get them right and to clean up properly, but there's a way. Okay, I'll keep this in the example, and then we have 10 minutes left. Okay. How do we? So now we have covered the available APIs at client side, and now some server side features can be used. We have already seen one of these, which was the clients.resize, if something needs to be resized from server side. But very often you just want to change the layout based on a server side decision. Maybe you want to render completely different template, completely different components for a mobile view, and you can't just render the same elements and rearrange them with CSS. You can also handle the client info event at server side and also server side media queries. And in order to achieve a dynamic layout, you can use templating. You can add and remove components directly, just as you're used to using MVVM templates or MVVM for each elements, or if elements, shadow elements, or in MVC. Just build a UI dynamically, or you can have an include with a dynamic URL. So there are many, many ways. I just have two simple examples for MVC and MVVM here in this example, in this project. So here is my my MVC case. What you can see here is the server is logging out some events from a composer in this case, and whenever I resize, you see that the server received the new size. So based on this size, you can change anything in the UI as you need. You can hide and show things. You can remove the number of columns in a grid dynamically. Well, this is just server-side logic. Basically, you have the freedom to do anything you like, as in any other ZK application. When we resize, we switch to small mode, we suddenly say we switch to a template content small. In this case, the alternative content has almost nothing. Just want to point out a small gotcha that may be happening there. So when I switch between back and forth, you maybe see the delay. That sometimes it takes a few milliseconds before the content area switches to the other template. And this is because it goes to the server side and comes back. Implementation-wise, this looks like this. So we have our we have the page. Yeah, the page now applies a composer, like in any of your other ZK MVC applications. And I have two templates, a content template large, content template small. If you haven't used templates before, if you don't want to use templates, you can also use include. But I just like the idea of the templates because they're a bit more decoupling, because then you have the freedom to place the content wherever you like and don't need to know the template URL in your composer. In the composer, I hopefully have a simple logic. What I store is the current content template, and the key is we listen to on client info at the root element on wrapper. So the on client info event is fired on root elements of your page, and whenever the screen size changes, this event will get fired to the server, a client info event, and you get the desktop width, desktop height. And I do the same decision here. I say if it's larger or equal to 800 pixels, switch to content large, otherwise use the template content small. And then I call content get template. So it will find the template inside the content div. Yeah, it will find the content by name. I call content create, and I say where to create. The parent is the content. And if you want to, you can pass some parameters into this template. This is the extra part above here that looks a bit more complicated. I create some template variables here that can be used in a Zool file to restore some or to hand over some state to the new template, because you will lose all the old components if you clear the children. And if you create a template, it will create new components. And maybe you want to preserve some information. So for example, if we type in our name and we switch to the mobile view, the name is preserved in this widget. It doesn't happen automatically. I implemented it like this. Yeah, this happens from our if we check the template it's loading, it's the content template small. Here it's using this template variable that I passed in to restore the value of the input. You can also do this at the code level, at Java level. Store the current state somewhere in your desktop or in the execution object. That's an alternative I'm showing here. In the layout composer, I store something into the current execution attribute, so that this any kind of state object can be preserved during the creation of the new template. You can use parameters for Zool files, or you can use execution attributes, desktop attributes. Don't put it into the session, because the session is shared between multiple browser tabs. So I would recommend desktop or execution to have some information to restore the current view if needed. Was there anything else in this one? No. Important here, client info available for MVC, and then you get the size and the width. And also you see here's the alternative for, if you use include component, you can also hard code these URLs into your Zool file, into your composer, and create the contents dynamically like this. And make sure you don't create this multiple times. That's why I check if the new template is different from the old template. So I don't recreate on every size change, only when we jump over the boundary. Okay. For the MVVM case, things are similar. I apply a view model. I think it's even a bit simpler. I use this one, I give it the name layout view model. And instead of having the templates lying around, I wrap them inside an apply element, which is just creating the template based on a view model property. But it's the same thing. It will find the template by the name specified in this string property, and it will then either render one or the other page fragment. Inside the view model, just side note, sorry, I'm jumping back, but here we see that we can get the current execution attribute and restore the content state. You see this also at the console here. So now switching back to the view model, sorry. So we have the layout view model. Lots of unused imports. Okay, so we have the layout view model, which we already said has a get current content template property. I have a get content view model. That's something I like to preserve state between the views. That's why it's easier in MVVM, because you have this decoupling from your Java code and the template code. I know I'm running out of time, but I want to finish this part, so don't worry. And for MVVM, you can use both the client info. If you have an on client info event listener at your root component, you can post a command into your composer. I think I haven't added this in this example. I'll just do it so I don't forget it later. Where is the MVVM? Yes, server-side MVVM. Yeah, you could do this on client info command, and then we say handle client info. It's the same event as an MVC, just hand it over into a command in MVVM. In our view model, we can use the context param context type trigger event to get it or pass it along in different ways. Oh, now someone's coming. Or we can use the match media convenience method that it can really use the media queries you use in your CSS file just at server side. And whenever one of these is triggered, it will call one or the other event. And then I update my layout in a similar way. Okay, sorry, my wife's coming back, kid is coming back. Wonder if there are any questions. No questions so far. Good. Then I'm just going into the last detail here. What I like in MVVM is if the view model is built directly, or if one view model creates the child view model. Here I create one content view model once, so I don't need to pass around any kind of data to preserve. It's just there already. Now we have a get content view model, the getter here, and inside my my content Zool file, for example here, I just use the view model property. Instead of providing a class name here, I just use a property that retrieves the view model object directly. And then the data is already there. Still, if you wanted to, you can replace it with a new object. I also have some commented out code here. So if you wanted to, you could create a new content view model and set whatever you want here to restore different data. Now, maybe on mobile system, you want to change the options or the choices or whatever. Yeah, so I think this wraps up the features we have. I think you already let us know if you want or don't want the recording. I will yes, stop the recording now. Let me see here.